The year is 1963. The Cold War is heating to a fever pitch. A tense world has witnessed escalation of the Vietnam conflict, the building of the Berlin Wall, the Bay of Pigs invasion, and the Cuban Missile Crisis, bringing civilization to the brink of destruction. But from the unique perspective of one man, there is a lighter side to everything, even Armageddon.
Well, boys, I reckon this is it. Nuclear combat toe-to-toe with the Ruskies.
I tell you what you better do, old buddy.
I can no longer sit back and allow communist infiltration to sap and impurify all of our precious bodily fluids.
This man is obviously a psychotic.
I do not avoid women, Mandrake.
Yeah.
But I do deny them my essence.
Yes.
Has that plane really got a chance of getting through?
If the pilot's good, see? I mean, if he's really sharp, he can barrel that baby in so low. I mean, you ought to see it sometime. It's a sight. A big plane like a 52. Vroom!
By the late 1950s, Stanley Kubrick has become deeply concerned about the possibility of nuclear annihilation.
Stanley became terribly interested in the thermonuclear dilemma. And when we finished Lolita, this was all that was on his mind, the possibilities of a nuclear holocaust.
Kubrick reads over 50 books dealing with the subject of nuclear war. A friend at the Institute of Strategic Studies, Alistair Buchan, recommends a novel by Peter George called Red Alert. Initially intent upon creating a reality-based thriller, Kubrick pays $3,500 for the screen rights to the original 1958 novel, written under the pseudonym Peter Bryant. The novel deals with a rogue United States military officer who attempts to initiate an unauthorized nuclear strike on the Soviet Union. In 1962, Kubrick and his producing partner, James B. Harris, begin to develop a screenplay titled Edge of Doom.
The first thing he did was to have me read the book by Herman Kahn called On Thermonuclear War, which was pretty sophisticated in terms of how it explained everything. Stanley has already read the book probably several times and was an expert on it. We developed the screenplay as a straight drama, a straight suspense story. We would work late into the night, and there were times when it got to be well past midnight, and we started to get a little silly and a little giddy, and started to imagine what it would be like if all of these people in the war room with this terrible problem were hungry and had to eat. I mean, this is the silly stuff that we started to think about. What would they call out to the Gaiety delicatessen?
You don't have any fresh fish?
I'm afraid not, sir.
Your eggs, then, they are fresh?
Oh, yes, sir.
I will have poached eggs.
However, there's nothing humorous about the real-life Cold War, as Kubrick learns when the American government discovers the presence of Soviet missiles in Cuba in late 1962.
The purpose of these bases can be none other than to provide a nuclear strike capability against the Western Hemisphere.
He had been very disturbed by the Cuban Missile Crisis. Not simply the prospect of nuclear annihilation, not simply, but also by the way that people accepted it fatalistically, that that's probably how the world was going to end, in a huge nuclear bang.
Ultimately, Harris departs from the project with Kubrick's blessing to become a director. Shortly thereafter, Kubrick informs Harris of a major conceptual change for the project.
I got a call from Stanley saying, do you remember when we discussed the possibility of doing this thing as a comedy? He said, you know, I really feel that the best way to tell this story, to make the point, the whole thermonuclear dilemma, is much better said in the form of a satire or a comedy than it is in the straight story that we developed.
He kept coming across various aspects of the story that weren't tragic, but were comic. For example, if a man learns the news that nuclear annihilation is nigh when he's in his office, the result is a documentary. When he's in his living room, it's a social drama. When he's in the bathroom, it's a comedy. And Stanley found that there were a lot of aspects of this subject that were comic.
Kubrick realized that this stuff was so incredible
that it could only be taken in and absorbed through a comic lens, through a satiric lens. And that was his great concept for the movie. He started out very literally, to make a very serious film about nuclear gamesmanship, and saw that it couldn't be done as he was in the material, and he came up with this idea of a nightmare comedy.
An early draft opens with extraterrestrials observing Earth in the wake of a nuclear holocaust and is titled The Delicate Balance of Terror. Kubrick decides that the now comedic script requires a degree of inspired lunacy. However, he feels the story should place the absurdities within a realistic framework. He turns to writer Terry Southern, whose novel Candy caused a media sensation with its bold and satiric look at modern sexuality.
I think he contributed a great deal to the satire of the film. Terry Southern was an incredible character with that quirky sense of humor, so he was ideal for the project.
Terry was always a political being and a humanist. The Cold War and the nuclear threat was something that was just part of his existential attitude towards these kinds of things, that it was really just systems of power that were out of control and that should be questioned without a doubt. And Terry was in this unique position of being the hipster, being the existentialist, being at the top of his literary form, and bridging that gap from, let's say, the beats to Hollywood.
Although Kubrick had initially planned to shoot the film in New York, he ultimately decides that Shepperton Studios in England can more suitably accommodate the production. Southern flies to London, and for 2 months he collaborates with Kubrick on the script during some very unorthodox daily writing sessions.
Stanley would say to Terry, what's the most outrageous thing this character can say and still be credible? And so Terry would just go at it, and that's how you'd come up with things like Purity of Essence of Bodily Fluids, and Dr. Strangelove, of course, is probably the best title of all time.
But it seemed to us that probably the subtitle was Stanley's, How I Stopped Worrying and Learned to Love the Bomb, because that doesn't sound like Terry.
Right.
Terry Southern, you know, was a writer who had a very sort of kinky sense of humor.
Terry is a bad boy, you know. He's ideal for writing the edgy part of Strangelove.
With the help of Terry Southern, he constructed, I think, the most perfectly written comic screenplay of the post-war cinema.
With the screenplay almost complete, Kubrick turns his attention to building the ambitious sets required for Dr. Strangelove at Shepperton Studios.
He was fascinated by my wartime record as a fighter pilot, so and he was a frustrated pilot himself, and we immediately hit it off, which finally resulted in my driving him to and from Shepperton Studios, where we were making Strangelove, in my E-Type Jaguar, which then was a faster sports car. Stanley insisted on my driving at not over 30 miles an hour, which was miserable, but you get to know each other pretty well.
Much of the action in Dr. Strangelove takes place in the now legendary War Room. Although no such place actually exists, Kubrick insists that the set reflect a totally realistic atmosphere. He reviews Ken Adams' initial sketches for the War Room set.
He loved it. He said, that's exactly right, you know, you've got it. And I said, you know, yeah, everybody is telling me this man is so difficult to work with. And in my first conversation with him, I seemed to be getting there. So I was so optimistic. And then, as always with Stanley, about 3 or 4 weeks later, we were driving to Shepperton, and he said, gee, Ken, I've been thinking about that War Room. You put it on 2 levels, and what am I going to do with the 70 extras on the upper level? And I think you have to rethink your concept. And I was really thrown, because I had to start from scratch. I tried to calm down by taking a walk in the grounds at Shepperton Studios. And then, after I was sufficiently calmed down, started doodling again on different ideas.
Adam designs a set that will become legendary. To build the War Room, he employs more than 150 tradesmen. The set measures 130 feet long, 100 feet wide, and 35 feet high. The centerpiece is a table 22 feet in diameter.
Stanley liked it and said, can you cover it in green baize? And I said, yeah, sure, I can cover it in green base, but, you know, we're shooting black and white. That doesn't make any difference because I want to give the impression that these 26 characters sitting around this table are involved in a gigantic poker game for the fate of the world, you see.
Over 10 miles of electrical cable are required to light the big board which keeps track of U.S. nuclear bombers.
The floors were made of formica, black formica, and we had to wear slippers on the set to save scratching it, because it's marked very easily.
They all came through one little door at the far end of the set. And the general reaction was, wow, look at this.
We knew we were in an impressive movie when you saw that set.
Adam and his team must also create a set of the interior of a B-52 bomber with no cooperation from the U.S. military.
I found a book called The Strategic Air Command by Mel Hunter. And on the front of it had the one picture which we desperately needed. Was not a very good picture, but a picture of the interior of the B-52 cockpit. And that was our starting point. We then had to really invent everything from then on.
Peter was brilliant, and because I more or less handed that whole interior over to Peter, and he spent hours and hours on switches and warning lights, which fascinated Stanley.
Merton's designs are realistic enough to cause concern in unexpected circles.
The publicity people invited some American Air Force personnel to look at the shooting we did. And they literally went white when they saw the inside of the B-52 because they said it was absolutely correct, even to the little black box, which was a CRM. So the next day I got a memo from Stanley. He hopes that I've got all my research from legal sources or from justifiable sources, because otherwise I and he could be in serious trouble with a possible investigation by the FBI.
Kubrick uses a series of models to simulate the B-52's flight toward the Soviet Union. But back projection footage is needed to create the illusion of flying at high altitude. A second unit is dispatched to the Arctic Circle.
The plane used to freeze up inside. It would all be white. If you touched it with your finger, you'd burn your finger. That's how cold it was when we were actually doing it. And one night they wouldn't give us any heating for the airplane at all, and we had to leave our cameras there. And when we opened the cameras, the film was just like dust. It just flaked away like that, and the spirit levels had all burst, had frozen and burst to 60 below. These were the conditions under which we had that 3 weeks. We did 28,000 miles.
The second unit crew qualifies for combat pay, accomplishing this unenviable task.
When we were flying across Greenland and then into Iceland, and we accidentally flew across a secret American base. We had no idea because we were in the mountains, you see. And suddenly two American fighters came up either side of us and waggled their wings and told us to go down like this. The pilots did this, go down. We couldn't see anywhere to land. It was just an ice fjord. And so we came down, he said, everybody lie on the floor because I will have no brakes. And it took an awful long time before we stopped. We were very close to the edge of the fjord by the time we finished. So the Americans were all there covered in their huge, Arctic foxtails and everything. And they thought that we were spies because it said Dr. Strangelove across the plane. They thought we were Russians.
As the film was coming in from the Arctic, I would be breaking it down, as you would normally do in a cutting room anyway. Stanley and I discussed how we could make this all work, came up with this system. We would go through the film meticulously, or at least I went through the film meticulously, cutting out a frame from every piece of perspective film, which we then mount in a card, punched out card, and we put this piece of film in, rather like a slide, rather like a photographic slide. I would have collated all these so that we would have them sort of based upon plates prospectively for left window, plates prospectively for right window, plates prospectively for front. So it was all filed and collated with a rough description such as icebergs or ice flows or sky on the card.
As the technical aspects of the production continue to progress, Kubrick turns his attention to casting. He approaches Peter Sellers, who had recently won wide acclaim in Kubrick's previous film, Lolita, to again play several roles.
Peter always hoped to work with Stanley Kubrick again after Lolita. And whenever Stanley explained to him that he wished him to be in Dr. Strangelove, there was no difficulty persuading Peter. Especially when Peter realized that he could play three parts: the RAF officer, the US president, and the president's very sinister Nazi advisor, Dr. Strangelove. Much of the part that Peter eventually played, the three roles in Dr. Strangelove, was not scripted. It came out of Peter developing it with Stanley Kubrick on the set like a jazz musician, each of them contributing to the riff.
I was under the impression that I was the only one in authority to order the use of nuclear weapons.
Do I take it, sir, that you are threatening a brother officer with a gun?
Whole point of the Doomsday Machine is lost. If you keep it a secret, why didn't you tell the world, eh?
The easiest part of the three for Peter to play was the RAF officer, because when he himself was serving, doing his national service, he used to impersonate officers, which, of course, was an offense that could have got him 10 years in a military prison. But he just loved it.
The role of President Muffley proves to be more problematic for Sellers. Initially, he decides to play him as a meek, fey character with an inhaler.
The whole stage, at Shepperton, was in tears because Peter played it as though he was suffering from asthma and a very bad cold. So he asked for an inhaler. And the whole 2 days we shot, he played it with his inhaler and his terrible cold. And it was hilariously funny.
We can establish contact with them at any time if it's necessary. The undersecretaries are all here, of course.
Right.
And Stanley said, now, wait a minute, Peter, we're on the wrong track. Merkin Muffley should be the one man who understands the consequences of his actions, the one serious point in the film. So you've got to play him seriously. And Peter said, rather like Adlai Stevenson, if he'd become president, if the results of the US election had gone the other way, and Stanley said, exactly.
I will not go down in history as the greatest mass murderer since Adolf Hitler.
Sellers' well-known ability to improvise contributes to some of the film's most memorable lines and situations.
Jack, I'd love to come, but what's happened, you see? The string in my leg's gone.
What he was supposed to say is, I have this thing in my leg which goes every now and again. And he said, what I actually said was, there's this string in my leg. And then he said, Sterling Hayden and I both got hysterical, but we managed to control it. And Stanley was shouting, keep going. And that's the take that's in the film.
Sellers also improvises the classic line where the beleaguered President Muffley has to inform the Soviet premier that the U.S. has accidentally launched a nuclear strike on his nation.
Now then, Dmitri, you know how we've always talked about the possibility of something going wrong with the bomb.
And though the conversations were actually scripted, Peter started, but only really delivered the first line of the script. And after that, he just improvised, and we just shot 10-minute takes.
One of our base commanders, he had a sort of, well, he went a little funny in the head. You know, just a little funny. And he went and did a silly thing.
He did this extraordinary improvisation in the war room, you know, with
a spirit of bold curiosity for the adventure ahead.
The actors just broke up. You could hardly get your scissors between the cuts.
Leadership and tradition.
Sellers even finds improvisational inspiration in Kubrick himself.
The black glove that he wears is Stanley's black glove. Stanley, for some reason, had to handle a lot of lights and didn't like getting his hands burned. So he put on these dark black gloves, which Peter always thought was very sinister. Peter borrowed one of them and put them in Dr. Strangelove. Dr. Strangelove comes out of the old High German cinema of Fritz Lang and Murnau, the sinister man, the man of tremendous power who is himself in some way impotent. That's to say, in the film, he is sitting in a wheelchair. Stanley loved that sense of the criminal genius, who, for one reason or another, is handicapped, has got a disability, which doesn't prevent him destroying the world.
It would not be difficult, my Fuhrer. Nuclear reactors could... I'm sorry, Mr. President. Nuclear reactors could provide power almost indefinitely. Greenhouses could maintain plant life. Animals could be bred and slaughtered.
In addition to playing Strangelove, Merkin Muffley, and Mandrake, Peter Sellers is also to play the key role of Major Kong, the commander of the B-52 sent to bomb the Soviets. However, Sellers tells Kubrick the demands of playing 4 parts are excessive. Additionally, he fears he cannot master a convincing Texas accent, so he calls on Terry Southern for help.
Terry could do a perfect Texan accent, of course, and so Terry prepared a tape for Peter of some sample dialogue, and so Peter would wear this wild headset and tape recorder thing. You know, you can imagine 1963 technology. You probably had to strap it on, and he's walking around the set listening to Terry's well, get those bomb doors if it hairlips everyone on Bear Creek, that kind of thing.
Ultimately, Sellers masters the accent, but more severe problems are looming. While filming the sequence in which Kong sits astride the nuclear bomb, an incontrovertible disaster strikes.
They had the plane suspended, 15 feet in the air. And Sellers was in the cockpit, and he and Kubrick were engaged in one awful row. Sellers got so taken away with the whole thing, he fell out of the cockpit. Now, 15 feet's a fair old drop, and that's when he broke his leg. And that's when he ended up in the wheelchair.
No way would he be able to get up into that cockpit. So then, of course, Stanley had to recast.
You got to shoot. Now, what do? If you're Stanley Kubrick, you go get Slim Pickens.
Stanley said, well, you can't replace Sellers with an actor. You've got to replace him with something like a real human being who's the real thing.
Kubrick had met Pickens on the set of One-Eyed Jacks, which starred Marlon Brando.
As it turned out, Slim Pickens had never left the United States, had to hurry and get his first passport. But he arrived on the set.
Suddenly the door opens in the corner. In comes this big cowboy with his big hat over in the corner. What a lolloping in like this. He just almost straight off his horse.
Somebody said, gosh, look, he's arrived in costume, not realizing that's how he always dressed, with a cowboy hat and a fringe jacket and the Justin cowboy boots, and that he wasn't putting on the character. He talked. That's the way he talked.
Stay on the bomb run, boys. I'm going to get them doors open if it hairlips everybody on Bear Creek.
He was Major Kong off and on the set. He didn't change. He didn't change a thing. You know, his temperament, his language, and his behavior.
The most famous image from Dr. Strangelove, the phallic symbol of Slim Pickens riding the bomb, presumably to a nuclear orgasm, almost did not occur. The sequence was an 11th-hour inspiration of Kubrick's, much to the chagrin of production designer Ken Adam.
It was a brilliant idea, except I hadn't allowed for it. The bomb bay was completed. The bomb bay was enormous, 60 feet long, and suspended from the grid on the big stage at Shepperton. But it didn't have practical bomb doors because we never intended to see. I said, well, when you need it by? And he said, well, I really ought to shoot it in 48 hours, in 2 days. I said, Stanley, even if I work 3 shifts, day and night, to make these bomb doors practical, we'll never do it in that time. And I talked to special effects man, Wally Weavers. It was a black and white picture. He said, we take a black and white still of the inside of the bomb bay, and I cut out the bomb bay doors. And then Slim Pickens was sitting on the bomb with blue backing. We shot it from a crane and crane back, and then optically reduce the bomb until it exploded into the missile site. And so it was a very simple solution.
The role of General Buck Turgison requires an actor of consummate skill, someone who can hold their own as a strong screen presence alongside the formidable Peter Sellers. George C. Scott had gained international acclaim for his work on stage and screen. Kubrick became convinced he was the man he needed after seeing him in the lead of a Central Park production of The Merchant of Venice. Kubrick is all too aware of Scott's reputation for volatility and devises a strategy to win his respect.
He was involved in barroom brawls. He was tough. He was a Marine. He drank a lot. And Kubrick handled them very well. He put a chess board on the set. He knew Scott fancied himself as a pretty good chess player. Kubrick's a master chess player. He views life as chess.
Watching George C. Scott, who took hours looking at the chessboard and planning his moves, and then Kubrick would walk over and just do his instantly and won almost every time.
And he demolished Scott. Now, if somebody thinks of themselves as a good chess player and they're whipped, they have enormous respect for the other guy. That's one of the ways that he got Scott's respect immediately.
Scott is indeed brilliant, playing against type in one of his first comedic roles. The character of General Turgison, who urges the president to capitalize on the accidental nuclear strike against the Soviet Union, was loosely based on General Curtis LeMay, a controversial figure whose anti-communist views were considered by some to be fanatical. Scott portrays Turgison as a somewhat juvenile character who pouts when scolded by the president.
I am becoming less and less interested in your estimates of what is possible and impossible.
He also has a schoolboy's viewpoint of sex, which finds him interrupting a meeting with the president to take a call from his mistress.
Well, look, baby, I can't talk to you now, but my president needs me. Listen, you go back to sleep, and Bucky will be back there just as soon as he can.
He's the ultimate optimist who sees the silver lining even in the scenario of a nuclear war.
Mr. President, I'm not saying we wouldn't get our hair mussed, but I do say no more than 10 to 20 million killed, tops, depending on the breaks.
He had a very, very long speech, and Stanley said, right, we're going to do it in master, and then, you know, close-ups. He said to George, go as far as you can. So George Scott started the speech, and he went on, and he went on. And he was literally word perfect. It was quite incredible, so much so that when we finally cut, the whole stage erupted. I mean, everybody applauded him. He was quite brilliant.
Yet Scott is at odds with Kubrick, whom he feels is encouraging him to overact wildly.
Kubrick manipulated some of those performances out of George by saying this, okay, George, you give it to me straight, or you give it to me simple, and I want you to go over the top. Give me one where you go over the top. And Kubrick invariably used the ones over the top, and George resented it. He was saying that was not my performance.
Kubrick goes to extreme lengths to secure an inspired cast of supporting actors. For the Mad General Jack D. Ripper, Kubrick succeeds in convincing maverick actor Sterling Hayden to come out of retirement to make his first film in years.
Mandrake, I suppose it never occurred to you that while we're chatting here so enjoyably, a decision is being made by the President and the Joint Chiefs in the war room at the Pentagon.
Sterling Hayden was brilliant, I thought, and that extraordinary face and that the way he delivered those lines about the precious bodily fluids and his performance with Sellers.
Buck, should I get it?
Yeah, you have to.
The only female role in the film is offered to Tracy Reed, the stepdaughter of acclaimed director Sir Carol Reed.
Hello? Oh, yes, General Turgidson is here, but I'm afraid he can't come to the phone at the moment. Well, this is his secretary, Miss Scott.
I went for the interview, and he was very sweet because he was terribly embarrassed. And he said, well, there is one drawback. You'll have to wear a bikini. So I said, why? And he said, because the part you're playing is somebody who is a floozy, I suppose, and I'm going to need to see your figure. But I'd been prepared for it, so it was fine. And he said the body wasn't too bad, so I could have the job. They wanted to do a sort of pretend Playboy centerfold, and I refused to take my clothes off. I mean, I'd done a bikini, that was quite enough. And so what I did was I lay on the floor and undid the top of the bikini, so it didn't look as if I'd got anything on at the top. And they put a book over my bottom. And my mother was absolutely furious because it was called Foreign Affairs, the book.
For James Earl Jones, who was appearing in The Merchant of Venice with George C. Scott, Kubrick provides the opportunity to make his screen debut.
He had come to see George C. Scott. He knew he wanted to use George as the Air Force general. And I happened to be playing Prince of Morocco. And I think all along he wanted to have the bomber crew made up of all the ethnics, you know, a Jewish guy, black guy, an Irish guy, Canadian guy, and so on. When I read the script, Zoggy was the only one to question the possibilities that this is a security test, that we were not supposed to bomb Russia.
Major Kong, is it possible this is some kind of loyalty test, you know, give the go code and then recall to see who would actually go?
There was quite an exchange between the bombardier and the captain of the crew about that. And for some reason, Kubrick decided not to have that exchange happen. And one day I got to the set and realized that scene was being cut. I was very disappointed because I thought, well, that's what made my character stand out.
Kubrick assists Canadian actor Shane Rimmer in one of his early film roles.
I found him terrifically approachable, very understanding, and very helpful, very quiet. The funny thing was, you'd be talking to him, and you'd notice him looking at you, like a Look magazine camera. He's just studying you, and he'd sort of shift a bit and walk around here and pick up another angle.
Keenan Wynn's brief but memorable role as a loyal but dense soldier provides a highlight of the film when Mandrake pleads with him to break into a soda machine.
Colonel, that Coca-Cola machine, I want you to shoot the lock off it. There may be some change in there.
That's private property.
During filming of Dr. Strangelove, Stanley Kubrick learns that another project with a similar theme is going into production. Although the film version of Failsafe is to be an ultra-realistic thriller, Kubrick fears that the similarities in overall plot will hurt Dr. Strangelove at the box office, especially if the rival film is released first. Kubrick is concerned because Failsafe will be a prestigious film headed by top actors including Henry Fonda and Walter Matthau. It also boasts an acclaimed director, Sidney Lumet.
We started casting. Fonda was already set, and which of course meant a big commitment in terms of money. I was set, Walter was set, and suddenly this lawsuit arrived, filed by Stanley Kubrick and Columbia Pictures.
Kubrick and Columbia try to stop production on Failsafe by claiming that the source novel had been plagiarized from Peter George's Red Alert.
The plots were vaguely similar, but totally different approach, and we handled it that way. Failsafe was much more of a melodrama.
Kubrick's strategy works. Although highly acclaimed by critics, Failsafe opens long after Strangelove to modest box office results. With their legal troubles behind them, the spirits of the cast and crew are lifted by a set visit from Cary Grant. Principal photography is completed in late spring of 1963, and Kubrick turns his sights to creating a captivating opening title sequence.
I was in Stanley's highway, hanging around, and then he asked me, what do I think about human beings? And I say one thing about humans, that everything that they invent is very sexual. And we looked at each other, yeah, B-52 refueling, of course. He said, well, we could shoot it, I have the models. And I said, well, let me take a look at some of the stock footage. So I went around to all the stock houses, and they had tons. I cut the sequence together to give you the two planes fornicating in top of midair. And then he looked at it and he came up with this song. It was an instrumental of Try a Little Tenderness, and we put it together. It was amazing. And we put a title over here and I put a title over there, and then you didn't know whether to watch, the title or the background, and it looked terrible. And then I said, well, suppose I come up with another idea about making, like, produce big, the word buy big, because it looks like we had to fill the screen in order for you to see two things at once. And then Stanley looked at it. I wanted to have an assistant work my lettering over so it'd be nice and neat. He says, no, I like the way you did it. So I said, okay. After I did it, we shot it and it worked out great, and everybody loved it, and he loved it. After 2 or 3 months the film was released, I got a phone call from Stanley, and he says, Pablo, did you know you misspelled a word? I said, I what? I did. I said, yeah, based on the book. There's no D on based.
With the titles complete, the remainder of the film has to be scored. Laurie Johnson and his orchestra have to maintain a fine balance in their composition for the film.
The main purpose of the score was to try and link with one arc the drama from the first cut to the first interior of the bomber. Right up to the last one when the bombs dropped.
Target in sight. Where in hell is Major Kong?
So that every time, although comedy is being played out on the screen, each time one returns to the bomber, the audience have to feel that it's a step nearer. The tension had to mount very, very slightly and very gradually over that. And each time the audience come back, whilst they may have just been loosened up by the comedy of it, something has to tell them subconsciously that inexorably you're going towards the main event.
The climax to Dr. Strangelove turns out to be the most famous unseen sequence in the history of motion pictures. Kubrick shoots the ultimate slapstick sequence, a cream pie fight which reduces the war room to chaos. From the beginning, it is doubtful as to whether it will be left in the final cut.
The studio had told him that early on, that we know what you're going to try to do. It's going to be one take only. And of course, since they were laughing, it was unusable, because instead of having that totally black, which would have been an amazing, like this blizzard, which in a sense is metaphorical for all the missiles that are coming as well, you just have these guys having a good old time. So, as Kubrick later said, it was a disaster of Homeric proportions.
The cream pies were flying around so thickly that people lost definition, and you couldn't really say whom you were looking at.
Kubrick opts to cut the ambitious pie fight sequence and end the film with the image of the miraculously reinvigorated Dr. Strangelove.
Mr. President, I would not rule out the chance to preserve a nucleus of human specimens.
It was a much better line to end the film on when, galvanized by his return to Nazi power and also the proposition of a lot of sex in the bunker, where the chosen leaders of the free world will be quartered after the hydrogen bomb has fallen on the rest of us, Dr. Strangelove actually rises out of his chair like Lazarus from his grave.
I have a plan. Mein Führer! I can walk!
During the final editing, we were about to dub the film, and the last reel of the film, which is the most complicated, which is the bomb run with Slim Pickens, which is hundreds of little cuts. It vanished from the labs, and it never was found. Oh, I was devastated. Because it had taken months to cut, it was enormously complicated. So I had to recut the whole bloody thing in about 2 weeks from memory. And I remember Stanley did this brilliant thing of cutting up the script, and everything was put on cards on an enormous board, and we reconstituted the whole thing and started from scratch.
As Kubrick prepares to screen Dr. Strangelove for critics, he finds the film has a rendezvous with destiny. The screening date is November 22nd, 1963.
Like everything else in America, the events of November 22nd, 1963, John F. Kennedy's assassination, moved everything, shook everything up.
We decided for obvious reasons that we better cancel the preview. Stanley was there, and Stanley readily agreed. In fact, he may have even been the first one to suggest canceling, but Stanley had a more specific reason, because unlike the rest of us, Stanley knew the dialogue.
Our president has just been assassinated, and now we're going to see the president of the United States portrayed in the film having to make momentous decisions about the future of not only his country, but of the whole world. And it was very much on everyone's mind as to how the public would react to this so soon after.
They also had to change a line in the film, which was when the pilot, Slim Pickens, is going through the content survival check, and he's saying, you know, prophylactics, lipstick, nylon stockings. Then he says, hell, a fella could have a pretty good time in Dallas with all that stuff. And of course, you look at his, he had to loop in, and the line now is Vegas.
Shoot, a fella could have a pretty good weekend in Vegas with all that stuff.
The impact of President Kennedy's assassination pushes the film's general release to late January in 1964.
You release towards the end of the year to take advantage of the acclaim, the awards, and the Oscars. But we had no choice. I mean, we had opted that it was too soon to go 3 weeks after the assassination.
Still, Kubrick initiates a highly imaginative publicity campaign.
Attack! Russia.
Beginning with Pablo Farro's trailers and TV spots, cut in his own inimitable style.
As everything with Stanley, if it was cutting edge, he was very much interested in it. So just as Stanley Kubrick was cutting edge for films, Pablo Farro was considered cutting edge for television spots and movie trailers.
Kubrick also micromanages the print ad campaigns, choosing a minimalist cartoon as the central image. Concerned that the main artwork will be too avant-garde for mainstream America, the publicity department convinces Kubrick to allow an alternative ad campaign for use outside of major urban areas.
Some of us resisted just that line cartoon art and fought with Stanley to add a photographic element to the campaign, and ultimately that art was supplemented with little postage stamp inserts of each of the principal characters.
The trailer became the new frontier for trailer making, and the print ad became the new frontier for print advertising.
However, the publicity department has a nightmarish dilemma. The major stars and Kubrick are all notoriously shy about doing publicity for their films, and Strangelove is no exception.
The least likely person to be the movie star representative of the film was Slim Pickens as a personality going out to sell the movie. But of course, Stanley was right, 100% right. Slim Pickens went on The Tonight Show. I was the publicist who brought him to The Tonight Show. Went on and, of course, killed him. Killed him with the interview that he did, and then, of course, showed the footage of him writing the bomb down.
Some elements of the publicity campaign are as offbeat as the film itself. One involves the use of the pocket radioactivity calculator, which Dr. Strangelove uses.
We made it available to theaters around the country. They could buy them to use, to give to their local press, to give out as contest prizes. They're a very inexpensive item, but it captured the feeling of this movie. On the one hand, these horrific circumstances that you were dealing with in this comic way.
Dr. Strangelove, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Bomb, opens in the United States on January 30th, 1964.
When it opened in New York, Bosley Crowther absolutely destroyed it. And he realized some months later what an extraordinary film it was. He re-reviewed it, which I think is very seldom done for the New York Times. It was extraordinary.
The film was a critical and commercial success in New York and London. Ultimately, Dr. Strangelove turns an impressive profit on its $2 million production costs, and in February of 1965 is nominated for 4 Academy Awards, including Best Picture, Best Actor, and Best Screenplay. The legacy of Dr. Strangelove continues to endure as new generations of movie lovers are exposed to its inspired style of filmmaking. The American Film Institute has not only voted it as the #3 comedy of all time, but also ranks it 26th among the 100 most important movies ever made.
Even today, 37 years after the film was released, when they refer to the Cold War and U.S.-Russian relations, they still think in terms of Dr. Strangelove. The New York Times just recently ran a story about nuclear deterrent and missile defenses, and the picture that they used to illustrate this was the war room from Dr. Strangelove. It actually had nothing to do with the story. There's no reference to it in the story, but the photo illustrating this story was the war room. It became that much a part of the American culture.
So much a part of American culture that Stanley Kubrick's vision influences even the highest circles.
I, Ronald Reagan, do solemnly swear.
Reagan, when he became president of the United States, asked his chief of staff to look at the war room in the White House. And the chief of staff, Mr. President, there is no such thing in the White House. And Reagan said, but I saw it in that film, Dr. Strangelove.
We'll meet again.
please say hello to the folks that I know. Tell them I won't be long. They'll be happy to know that as you saw me go,